Welcome, everybody, to the August episode of the Pro Show. I'm Sandy Ucia, coming to you from Northern California, again, still.
And I'm Daniel Laskowitz, and I'm coming from Utrecht again for every episode is from Utrecht, I believe. so that's good.
I don't know. I feel like maybe there was one where you were somewhere else.
Okay, maybe.
I don't know. Maybe, well, or when maybe we tried to do one from a conference or something, but I don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and maybe someday that'll happen again. But
maybe.
And our guest today is Harysh from Microsoft, who is one of the senior product managers for Power Automate. If you want to say hello, Harysh.
Hey all, I'm Harysh. I'm coming from Bellevue, Washington.
Okay, cool.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
Sure, you're welcome. And I think you work especially a lot with the Teams integrations, right? I think that's most. Okay.
So I own all the integration pieces for Power Automate. So the ways in which Power Automate integrates with Teams, SharePoint, Excel, Azure, you name it. I probably have some kind of hand in it.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize all of those. I think I'd only heard about the Teams.
I think I'm gonna get more questions because I just said that, but let's get
That could be. That could be. All right, thanks. And so, as usual, we're going to go right into our Power Automate news. I actually realized as I was putting together these slides that they all still said flow, and we had never changed it. So anyway.
I'm gonna mute somebody.
Yeah.
Yeah, muted.
Okay. All right. Thanks. So anyway, this is where we go through what's been new in Power Automate since our last show, which was at the end of July. And so one is that there are two new pre-built AI builder models. One is to process receipts and one is to translate text. And both of those require you do not require you to have to do any training of the model or configuration or even need a trial license, which is cool. I just tested that myself to make sure. So anybody can use those. It did seem like you had to go and sort of enable it because it is in preview currently, at least the translate one that I tried. I think the receipts is as well. But I think that's pretty cool that you can make use of those without even really needing to, to go through all the teaching it what a receipt looks like. For example, I gather, it'll probably only work with certain basic types of receipt printout kind of things, but still, that's probably lots of the receipts that you get from restaurants and gas stations and things like that. So very cool.
Really cool.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the next one is about UI flows again. Last show we had a lot of UI flow updates, and this time there's another one. There's variable support in UI flow, so you can now use all those variable actions that you already know from automated flows. You can use them also inside UI flows, and that's really interesting because there have been tons of updates already with UI flows. They had, I believe, applied to each support last time, and the arrays in the inputs, those kinds of things are in there, and now you also have the variables. So I think they are progressing really fast with UI flows. So yeah, it's exciting times.
Yeah, I think it lets you build more complex flows now. That's like you can actually integrate it into your UI flow itself. It's really exciting to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. There were 7 new connectors released last month. Neither of us know anything about any of these connectors, but if you use any of those, then you'll recognize the logos, I guess. But a couple of them had to do with SMS messages, and a couple of them had to do with dynamics. Specifically, that top little cute robot one was something about Indian documents, like driving licenses and things like that, which I thought was kind of interesting. But I like the logo.
Yeah. Looks a bit like Wall-E or what? Okay. Yeah. So the next one is really exciting for our guest, most of all, right. Because he worked on it. It's triggering flows from any message within Microsoft Teams. So we already know for a selected item in SharePoint or in Dynamics, for instance. There's also now one for on a selected message for a selected message in Microsoft Teams. And that gives you lots of possibilities to integrate Power Automate into Teams as well. And that makes it really, really nice, because then you can just do a lot of things from Teams instead of having to switch to other context. And that's really the nice thing, I believe. But Harysh is going to talk a lot more about it. But it's a really, really exciting update. Yeah.
Yeah, my favorite piece of news so far, by the way.
Oh.
I may be biased, but yeah, we'll be talking a lot more about it. So.
Yep, cool. Yep, and a demo, right? Yep, great. And so then some community highlights. We wanted to call out this recent video from Shane Young, who usually does videos on Power Apps, but now and then he deigns to do one about Power Automate. But yeah, so this one is about Flow and Teams integration. So should be a good follow-up to today's episode, I think, if you want to go check that out.
Yeah, and another one is about Automatedit. That's a show that Kent, who you saw a couple episodes ago, and John Levesque have together with Pranav. And they had 2 new episodes, both about UI flows. So if these topics are interesting for you, just go to the link at the bottom, and you can view all the episodes in there. There's lots of good information around UI flows. Almost every episode was about UI flows, I believe. So make sure to watch those episodes if you need to catch up on UI flow knowledge.
Great. And lastly, I think there's a contest going on, if you didn't know it, on Twitter. So if you check out that hashtag, Automatedit, that is about the contest for solving people's solutions. Is John, did John join?
I didn't see him.
He said he was going to, because I was going to say he could talk about that, how it's going. No?
Yeah, no, he's not in there. Oh.
He must not have been able to figure out the link. But anyway, I think there was a week or 2 where people were submitting problems that they would like to see solved with Power Automate. And then now currently it's in the stage where people are submitting solutions to those problems. So if you check out that hashtag, you'll see that. And there were, I forget what they were called, not problems, but scenarios or something, then you can see, who's trying to solve which ones, and you can win fantastic prizes as shown in the picture there. So check that out.
Yeah.
And so now we'd like to reintroduce our guest for today, and I will let you take it away. Harysh, you should be able to share your screen.
Thank you for having me, first and foremost. So today I'm primarily going to cover let me make sure you can see my screen first. Okay, there we go. I didn't see the red square before. Yeah, so we're primarily here to talk about the new Teams integration, which I've been very closely involved in. The idea here is today, especially with the way things are in the world, a lot more of your work is moving into Teams. Like Teams is where a lot of the work starts, where you get information about new stuff and where your day-to-day is happening. So we wanted to provide an easy entry point from Teams into your other services that your organization could use. So things like even Microsoft things like Planner or Azure DevOps and so on and so forth, but even to other apps and services that your organization might be using. So one of the key ways for us was like using the message as the starting point, because that's the main entity that has all the information. So there's a lot of rich info there, like things like who sent the message, what the details of the message are, what the content is, like who could be mentioned, and so on and so forth. So how could you use all of that information, pass it along to another service, and make the whole process more automated? So I'll be going over how to construct a flow from scratch and how you can get started. We do have templates that you can get started from as well, but I just wanted to show you how easy it is to create a new flow. So this is a new instant trigger, like Daniel mentioned. It's called for selected message. When you click into it, we've created this more simplified adaptive card creation experience so that you don't have to enter a rich JSON. So when you click into create adaptive card, it lets you create a simple form for you to get started with. We didn't want to provide a blank screen for you to get started. We wanted to provide an example of like how you could potentially use it. So we have like a sample form here in place. So you could modify stuff like telling you about the text, what types of inputs you might want to collect, and basically providing inputs and changing the style of the text a little bit more. So I'll show you how easy it is to modify this. So I want to create an experience where I might want to use a message to create a planner task, for instance. Let's keep it simple for the main demo. So here, I don't want to say tell us about yourself because that's not what this is about. So I might want to go in here, change this around. So I'll just say, call this create new design task. And you can also apply styling. You can apply things like separators if you wanted to change the spacing around. Then let's also modify this text to say, provide details around the. And beyond this, like none of these are really applicable in this scenario for me. So I might want to like modify this to say task title. And sorry, title. And then have change the like text, etc. to like say what stuff that's more relevant to my scenario. So for instance, instead of the placeholder saying last first, I could say enter a title for task. And instead of having your email, I want like a additional notes section perhaps. And since since additional notes could be like a multi-line text field, like you could just modify that, say multi-line, and you can see it expands in line. If you wanted to add more stuff around like severity, etc., you could even drag other elements in here. So you could do stuff like add a date time picker if you wanted to. You could add a number toggle, etc. So as you can see, like creating a new input field is super easy. You just need to drag and drop it in place. The one thing I do want to call out is the main key field you need to not worry about, but like pay attention to is this ID field, because within the flow, this is what is used to sort of in the dynamic content to sort of figure out like what these inputs are. So for instance, you might want to give your task title instead of saying my name, you might want to give it as task title so that it's a little bit more clear what it's doing. And similarly, you might want to replace your notes field. And let me also move this. And you can call it task notes. And you should be, and so this looks good to me. Like you don't have to modify anything around the action payload. If you want to really get tricky with it and sort of like use JSON, we do have the option of that as well. So if you want to expand this, you can see the actual raw JSON that this is converted into. And so you can modify stuff in there. You can add elements like fact sets if you wanted to, and modify, like create a more detailed detailed form. And this is all the user would see on the team side of things. Like they would just see this within a modal dialog, and you can quickly get started. So once I hit save card, my adaptive card is set into this already, so I'm good to go. The next step that I might want to do is obviously create that planner task. So let me just look for planner, and I'll use create a task. There we go, signed in. And for the team, I'm going to use the Mark8 project team and the Mark8 project plan. And for the title, this is where like all these dynamic contents that we created comes into play. I'm going to move the meeting title to this side so people can see what's happening. So you can see here, there's a lot of useful info that's already present as part of this this trigger. So you could use things like directly just use the task title, but there's also stuff like who sent the message, what the ID of the message is. You can even do a link back to the message if you feel that that's useful. So for instance, in this case, I'm just going to use the title field. And so I'm just going to say task title, and I'm good to go. But you could, for instance, notify the users who this might be assigned to and say, hey, this is the title that's assigned to you, and this is where the ask came from. For instance, in this case, let's pick a user we might want to like notify that a task was created. Let's pick Megan in this case. So I will also add a task, add a message in here that says post a message. So here I'm just going to use a simple post as an adaptive card pot. So I'm just saying post a message as a flow bot to the user. And here I'm going to say, like, it's an alert to myself saying, hey, new task created. And you can give information like who this is to be sent to. I'm logged in as admin, so just to show you the scenario, I'm going to use admin. And in the message, you could give more rich content saying, hello, a new task was created in the design backlog. And then you could give information on like what the title was. And so that's picked straight from the title. But you could also include stuff like this task was created from Teams, and here's some additional content. And so what this lets you do is now also include stuff like who the sender was. So we might want to say this actually came from a particular person. So who was the sender in this case? So I'm going to choose the sender user display name. So you can just choose the display name for the user. You can see message content. And even for message content, we provide two options for you. You could choose the plain message contents, which is actually the rich text HTML that team saves the message as. But we also have like a plain text message content so that it's easier to use with text fields. So you don't have to like modify with like go into like modifying HTML and so on. So if you just want the raw contents. So you can just say plain text message content. So it converts whatever HTML was into plain text and saves that in here. And you could even do stuff like link back to the message. And you could add link to the message, and you can see there. So now whoever this task was created for has a lot of info on where it came from, like what it was about, what the thread was within Teams that you might want to like look back into, and so on. In general, this is kind of a design pattern for this trigger that we tend to advise. Like if you look at a lot of our templates, it's a similar structure. We say if you're starting from a for selected message, you create a form, you do the thing that you wanted to do from that trigger, but you also should have some kind of a notification mechanism back to the user so that, oh, this is what happened as a result of you doing that. The best way to do it is actually, instead of using a hard-coded value here, you could even use something like originating user ID. So if you look here, you can see here, we actually give you a difference between who sent the message versus who triggered the flow, like because those could be two different people. Like you could have someone from support like send the message, but you could have someone from the project team like create the task for it because they feel that it should be a task. So it's important to differentiate these little things. And you can even add, I forgot to add task notes, but you could even add those kind of fields back into this so that it's more relevant to the user. And
these are great tips.
Yeah.
Thank you. Let me put this in a specific bucket so that we know where it should go. So I'm putting it in engineering. And the other key part of this, creating this flow, is giving it a friendly name, because the way it surfaces itself within Teams is based on the name that you give it within Power Automate. So I'm going to call this create design task. And so that way people know exactly what this action is going to do. If you give it the default, this one it's going to say API something something, etc. So it's not really useful for the user. And the other thing I want to sort of call out is try to keep that name a little like concise, because like there is limited space within Teams. So if you say create design task for message blah, 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 so if you go into that, the user's not going to get as much information, but still just a friendly tip there. So now that I've saved this flow, if the demo gods are good with me and all my tenants are set up, it should show up in my team. So here you can see I have a design channel where I'm sending out a message that says we need to do a research study to see if the new design is leading to better results. So I might want to use this as my starting point to like create a new task. So now if I go to ... you'll see a bunch of Teams options, and there's a more actions page. And when you click into more actions, we do a dynamic fetch to see what are the flows that might be relevant to this message, or what are the flows associated with, like, do you have a trigger for the for selected message? And you can see the one that we just created called create design task is right here. And you can see because of the space, you can now tell why I don't generally prescribe long names. But yeah, so keep it small, keep it simple. And when you click into it, we basically fetch the adaptive card that you created. So you can see here the form is within Teams. It's styled in the generic Teams fashion. So you can like give it a title here. You can say setup research. And it's a new request for research study and hit submit. And now this goes back to the flow. It runs with the relevant parameters that it needs to. It creates the task if everything's fine. And you can see here, it notified me saying, hey, this is the task that was created. So if I click into it, you can see all the information that I set up is present here. So you can see it's stuff like new task was created. There's stuff around like what the title was, who the sender was. I could do a better job with with the editing of this, but leave that for another time. And I'll come to some of that later as well. But you can see here, there's also like a deep link directly to the message. So if you created your own adaptive card, or if you wanted to save it for auditing purposes, for instance, there's a link back to the message that started this whole process. That's a key thing that you might want to like, if you're, for instance, creating Azure DevOps issues from Teams, right? Like that might be something that's useful for the person who's seeing it in Azure DevOps to come back to. And just to prove that I'm not lying, I'm just going to deep link to that and see what happens. And I will cancel. I want to use the web app instead. And it should open Teams and go straight back to that message that started all this. The right channel, and there you go. It highlights the message that it started from, so you know now that this was the message that started the process. So that way, it sort of closes the loop. You have a start, you collected information, you did a thing within Flow, and then you notify the user that, hey, this thing was done. So that is the for selected message flow. So like I mentioned, there's a bunch of templates that we created for you to get started from. One of my personal favorites is the follow-up action. So what that does is it basically creates an action to remind you to look at a message again. Because if you're living in Teams and there's a lot of people going on, there's a lot of messages flying around, so you might miss a message or two. So let's see if I can find that. That's just added. There we go, follow up on message. Worked, and it's 517 already, so it's popular. Nice. So you can see here, so it's a very simple flow. It doesn't need any inputs. We did do the work to construct a more complicated adaptive card for you to use for this particular flow. So I'm going to save this just to show it to you in action. So if I go back here and say, let's pick that same message again. It's a very simple flow, but you can see here there's a follow-up on a message option. And it gives you like a thing saying, when do you want to be reminded of this message? You want to be reminded in 20 minutes, in 1 hour, tomorrow, in a week. And so you can say, hey, I want to be reminded in 20 minutes and hit submit. And that goes back to flow. It actually stops the flow and starts a timer for 20 minutes. And at the end of 20 minutes, it sends you a notification saying, hey, this was a message you wanted to be reminded on. And here's a link back to the message, and you should be good to go. So that's running for 20 minutes. I'm going to leave that be and go to the next part of the demo.
That's very cool. So where does the message come to you then, in your chat?
It comes to you from the Flowbot, and it also gives you an activity feed alert so that you know that you need to look at it for sure.
Okay. Cool. So how long does it take until when you save it? How long does it take until you can see it in your message? It's almost instantly, right?
Yes, it's nearly instant. If we do some optimizations on the team side to sort of query like debounce if there's nothing there. So if you're running Teams and you don't see it immediately, just give it at best 5 minutes and it should show up immediately.
Okay, like it should. Good.
But if you're building and testing at the same time, it's immediate.
Yeah, when I tested it yesterday, it worked immediately.
Nice.
If you're not seeing it, there's probably some bug, and please let us know, because we have heard a couple of reports of that. So yeah, reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help. The next one I want to sort of speak about, which is one that we've had for a bit now, but it's a really cool new action, is the mentions. So if you know Teams if you're using Teams on a daily basis, especially very heavily, people set up their notifications in such a way that they want to be alerted only when they mention. So mention's a good way of getting someone's attention. So you things like if I want to send a message to somebody, but they can view it later versus they need to view it now, the difference in that could be I'm sending them a message versus I'm sending them a message with a mention in it. So we added a dedicated action for getting a mention token for a user. So that way it's super simple for you to include that in your message. And I'll show you an example of how we could potentially do this. So I have a SharePoint list here that's called design asks. So what I'm going to do, I'll just give you an overview of the flow that I'm trying to create. Is whenever there's a new design ask that's come in here, I want to basically send a notification in a specific channel and mention the owners of that channel or owners of that team to say, hey, there's a new design ask. You might want to look at it, or you might want to assign it to somebody, etc. So before I create the issue here, let's create the flow. And so let's go back into edit flow and say my flows. If I'm going long on this, let me know.
Yes, you're fine.
So
we did have a question about the other one.
Oh yeah, sure. While I do this, you can ask me.
Yeah, sure. Geeta was wondering if those flows on the selected message, is that then visible in all your channels, or is there a way to direct that to be just in certain channels or certain?
Today it's for all your channels. It's for actually not all your channels, all your messages. So if no matter which team you're part of, no matter which if like even within the flow card, you'll actually see it here. So if you wanted to do it from flow for flow, you could do it. The reason for that is, as you can see, like it's tied to a message, and we sort of view this trigger as like a personal productivity gain sort of situation. So it's stuff that you're doing for yourself that increases your productivity. So that way, we want it to be available no matter where you're in Teams. Like we don't want to say, oh, you're here, so it's not there. But if you're here and it's this message, you can see it. That being said, if you did create a flow and share it with a team, you could potentially like give a subset of your users access to it. Like then they will start seeing it wherever they use flow, etc. So
I'm just thinking maybe more along the lines of restricting it. Like I could imagine that you could create these type of flows that really are only relevant to certain teams, but not others. Similar to how you do that on SharePoint lists too. Like you just create them on the list that they make sense on.
That's a fair ask, and that's something that I can take back to my team and figure out.
Okay.
Feature request already.
That's great. That's why we do this. So more than happy to get those. So I am going to now use this to notify a channel that says there is a new design ask. And the main thing I want to do is add a mention in here. So I'm just going to use a standard post a message as bot to a channel. And I will say market project team, and I'm going to use the design ask channel and say design ask and use the title that the user might have said and have a from field. Again, I'm not focusing too much on the beautification piece of it, but you can do that later.
Yeah.
And you can say from so-and-so requested ID. But this, all it would do is like send a message to the channel, which might be useful, like if you have someone who's viewing the channel at a constant rate, but you might want to like notify the owners of this team or something like that, or specific people that, hey, this has happened. So you can now have an action called get mention token. So if you go into Teams and you say mention, you should see it. So you say get at mention token for a user, and all it takes is the either the AD ID or the email ID of the user. So in this case, I want to notify myself because I want to show the demo. So I'm going to choose admin, and you can add one more. I'm going to add one more mention token to show you that you can add multiple mentions as well. So I'm going to say mention again, and I'm also going to mention Megan in this case. And paste that in there. And now what this does is, I'm just going to rename this to give it a friendly title. So you can say mention team lead, and you can also say, this way you can tell which mention is which. It's a quick and easy way for you to add it. And now if you want to just choose like mention these people, so you can add like an FYI line in here and say, you just need to drop the mention of the team lead and space, and I'm going to space project lead that you want to do, and that's it. So if you look at this flow, like if you look at the flow run of this, you will see, I'll show this to you later as well. Like it's fairly simple, like it does an add, but under the hood, there's a lot happening. So I'll come to that in a little bit. So that's all this is doing. When an item is created, I'm mentioning a team lead, mentioning a project lead, and posting a message. So now that I've saved this flow, let's hopefully run it and pray to the demo gods that this happens. New, I can say, request your email. I'm just going to say, and I'll give it a description. Need a screen for So I'm going to save that. So adding this should now trigger that flow if all else works properly. So let's go back and just refresh. Speak amongst yourselves.
Well, I have another piece of feedback if you want.
Yeah, you can ask me questions. Well, hopefully this runs.
So the action to get that mention token was called mention somebody, right? Because I would think reading that action, I take that to mean I'm actually ready to mention them right now, whereas really you're just getting their name or the
Actually,
token.
it's the task is titled get at mention token. So it's
it is. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what
All
the
right.
action is for.
Okay, I missed that. Thanks.
And so now it says it succeeded. So let's go see what happened. So if I go into Teams, go to design asks, you can see here there's a new design ask. You can see the information about it. And more importantly, there is like a
Cool.
mention objects in here. So you can see all the styling, etc., that's applicable to Teams happens. So you now don't have to do anything extra. It's just like within Teams, how you say at person, it's the same way. Like you say at email and you should be done. And all the stylings and the notifications as well come through here as well. So you can see here, it should say, yeah, so at Flowbot mentioned you. And if you wanted to not use the Flowbot for this notification, you wanted to use the user, the at mention token will work, function exactly the same way. So you can use it with any message that is sent into Teams, be it from the bot, be it from the user, everything happens fine. Speaking of which, let me show you what's actually happening. So if I go into the flow here, you will say the inputs for this is just the email ID. You can see the output here is fairly simple. So you might ask that, oh, I could have just included that here and everything would have functioned fine. But this is actually more of a notification to us. So when we see this kind of a mention object that this creates, and you put it with a message action, we basically read that and do the necessary things to replace it with the actual mention object that Teams understands, because Teams expects this information to come in a certain way and have certain IDs associated with it so that it can do its styling and notifications and so on. So we've made it super simple for you to understand so you can see what's happening. But under the hood, there's a lot more happening. So, and we have specific logic in place that says if you're using a bot, we need to do this to mention. If you're using a person, you might need to do something else to mention. If that person is not in the team, what happens when you mention? So those kind of things are all taken care of by the action and the associated send message as well.
Okay. So in other words, don't try and hack that by just using that text.
Ideally, don't try to hack that, but it's a good way to just see what's happening.
Yeah, I already tried the same thing before the at mention token action was there. So I saw that already. Like you could put at in front of it and after it. And and then you could do something, but it didn't work. So.
So before it only worked in specific places with specific actions. We wanted to make it as generic as possible, which is why we broke it out into a separate token action altogether. So yeah, that was mentioned. We also have a bunch of new actions that we added within Teams. I'm not going to demo all of those, but I'm just going to show it to you. Skip this. And go to Teams. So we did add recently when a new team member is added, but now we also have when a team member is removed. So if you can see, if someone leaves the team, you can do specific cleanup associated with it. So you might want to revoke access or notify somebody that someone left a team and so on and so forth. So we have that. We have the usual channel members added, but within actions, we now have like add a member to a team. You can remove members to a team. You can create a channel. We are adding a few more in the very near future. One of the main ones is create a Teams meeting. I know that was heavily requested. So what that does is it's very similar to the Outlook action we already support. But in addition to that, what it does is it creates a Teams join link and puts that in the body and changes the location to say Teams meeting. Everything that you see from within Outlook when you say create Teams meeting for this, same exact action, but within Power Automate. So for instance, you could combine that with, we've seen a scenario where someone has an escalation channel where people post like incidents or something like that. And we have a create incident bridge action, which like creates a meeting and people can join the meeting bridge immediately. So that's a cool way we've seen that being used. So keep an eye out for that, and maybe I'll be back to demo that at some point.
So will there also be in the future add mentions for other things? So I can imagine people would like to mention the owners of a team, or maybe a whole team, or all the members of a team, or something like that. Also channels probably.
Right.
Yep. Yes, but not yet. There are limitations on the team side as well when something is coming via a service or an app or within a card that they can't mention certain objects. So right now we only support users. So you'll have to find workarounds for like, for instance, mentioning owners might require you to list owners and then mention.
Yeah, exactly.
But we do want to support mentioning channels and teams especially. And so we're working with the teams folks on that. And the other one that we're keen on supporting, but there's necessary APIs that need to have in place, is the tagging within Teams. So in Teams, you can tag a specific set of users as PMs or EMs or design and so on. And so mentioning those making that simpler is something we're looking at too.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting.
Yep.
Sure.
I do want to quickly touch upon, like, I'll give you a preview of something that's coming. I'm not going to show you a demo, but I'm going to show you a preview.
Okay.
I'll just specify it.
We don't want you to get in trouble.
Yes, I have. There is Ignite coming up, so I'm under restrictions of what I can say versus can't. But for instance, you notice that for the selected message, we had an adaptive card editor where you could quickly and easily modify an action. But within Teams, we don't have that as an option. Like for instance, when you say post an adaptive card, post your own adaptive card. Yeah. Yeah, so when you say this, we still expect the JSON over here. So we are working on improving this experience as well, and like adding an editor experience similar to what you saw in the trigger in here as well. But it's going to take a while because we don't want to just add it and leave you like high and dry, because we know a big part of how you use actions and within a flow like this is using dynamic tokens within the card, and we want to make sure that experience is locked in and tight, and so it's easy for you to use before we enable it. But it's something that we're working on. I know a lot of people have asked me like, hey, that's a simple way for you to create an adaptive card. How do I do it here? In the interim, you could go to Adaptive Card Designer and just create a card here. It's all the same elements. In fact, this is the portion that we're embedding back in there, and just copy this card over. A couple of tips: don't make sure the version is 1.2 or below, not 1.3. You can run into issues with that and so on. So, yeah.
Okay,
that is
great.
all I have.
Yeah. Okay, well that's been really interesting.
Yeah, one question about the adaptive cards, because there you mentioned there's a version 1.3. Is that going to be supported in the near future, or?
As soon as Team supports it, we'll support it. Team
Okay, good. So
what's
that's really nice.
What's in 1.3 that's not in 1.2?
I don't know
Curious, just
exactly,
curious.
but there's yeah.
Or for example,
usually they do some kind of updates in there. Yeah.
I'm actually not sure. I haven't paid close attention to 1.3. I know 1.2 introduced a few elements with stuff like hiding blocks and stuff like that. We don't support all of those yet.
I was just thinking maybe you had some specific use case, Daniel, or something.
No. But usually there's a lot of cool new stuff coming in the new version. So I already saw that with the 1.2 version that got supported by Teams not too long ago, actually. But that was also really interesting because it had media stuff in there, and yeah, that's really interesting.
Yep, I think for 1.2, media was a big element, and toggle visibility was the big other one where you could like show or hide elements. So those were big ones.
Yeah.
Do you have anything that you'd like to tell us about maybe some coming integrations with the other things besides Teams, since you said you've got your finger in everything?
Learn more.
Not stuff
That's
that
an
I can
answer.
disclose. But we did, for instance, one
Or
which I
recent
don't
things.
have time. Yeah, a recent one I can call out is Office scripts. So if you've not played around with Excel and Office scripts, it's a really cool way for you to like integrate Power Automate and Excel scripts in a single page. So we have actions within Power Automate. Let me just quickly show you.
Yeah, I think we mentioned that in the last show because it was in the news, but didn't. I haven't tried it yet.
Yeah, we have actions for running a script and creating a script. There's a really cool demo that I didn't have time to set up. Maybe in a future show, or I can share information with you later. But it allows you to like do more complicated things, a la macros in the early days within Excel, but have those run from within a Power Automate. So one cool scenario that I generally showcase is if you have an Excel sheet that's collecting project updates, for instance, and if something is empty in a particular column, you might want to notify that user and say, hey, give me this information. We had an Excel script that looked for the empty column, but then used Flow to like notify within Teams, collect the information within Teams, and update the Excel without that user having to leave Teams, right? Oh. So you have all of that running in one flow. Like that was a really cool scenario.
Yeah, nice. That is cool.
Don't have the demo for it.
Yeah,
okay, that's fine.
The Office scripts, I really like them. They're like a modern version of macros, actually. Yeah, really
it's
cool.
Like JavaScriptified macros.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, if there's any other questions, I'm happy to take them too.
Okay, yeah, if anybody on the call has any questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself if you want to.
One. Crickets.
But if not, then I think, thanking you very much, Harysh. This has been really interesting and really good additions, I think. Yeah, things that people will definitely be able to make a lot of good use of. Real people who are trying to do real things with Power Automate.
Yeah, we're very excited to see what use cases you guys come up with for this, because part of the thrill of doing these kind of new actions and triggers is you imagine a set of things that might be used for, and you put it out in the world, and people use it for all kinds of crazy things. So that's what I'm looking to see.
Oh, well, that's really interesting. So where can people go? What would be a good way for people to let you know about that? Via Twitter or something?
You can let me know on Twitter. I'm at Harysh M. So if there's something, feel free to chime in. You can post in our ideas channel or within our community, within our Power Automate community. You can post for help there, or even post like stuff that you've done with Teams. That would be also a fun way. And yeah, I'm always available through Teams or through email. So that's another one.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Yep. And I guess, so we haven't scheduled our next episode yet, but sometime in September, probably after Ignite, I think is what we were looking at.
Yeah.
So that we can talk about whatever has come out at Ignite. And I imagine there might be a few things.
There will be a few.
Yeah. All right. So thanks a lot, and see everybody next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.